In the Dominican Republic, people took the streets to protest against the increase in the prices of the basic food basket and fuel. More mobilizations called for March 1st and 2nd. Protesters marched across the United Kingdom against the country's rising cost of living and the government's announcement of increased energy bills. Canadian police cleared the trucker protests at a border crossing between Canada and the United States. Hi, this is From the South. I am your news anchor, Dio Martin, from the TeleSUR studios in Havana. We begin with the news. In the Dominican Republic, people took to the streets to protest against the increase in the prices of the basic food basket and fuel. The Broad Front called for a nationwide mobilization on March 1st and 2nd. Demonstrations have been registered with burning tires on the street and roadblocks following the call made by a spokesman of the Dominican opposition for a 48-hour strike in San Francisco de Macorís. The Minister of the Interior and Police, Jesus Vasquez, denied the mobilizations were serious events and added they were financed by the opposition and did not pursue any social demands. Ecuadorian educators mobilized in different cities of the country to demand a salary increase and the possibility of retiring after 30 years of service. Protests were held in 17 of the 24 provinces on the day the Constitutional Court gave the executive branch a 6-month deadline to present a report on the budget impact of the demand for teachers. According to the National Union of Educators, teachers' salaries have been frozen for years with the argument that there are no funds to increase them, while at the same time they point to salary increases for members of the National Police Force. The main demonstration took place in Quito, where educators gathered in the afternoon outside the Ecuadorian Institute of Social Security to begin their march towards the historic center of the city. In Haiti, Judge Chavan Etienne resigned from his post after being appointed to investigate the assassination of former President Jovenel Moïse, becoming the 4th judge to decline the case. Now, the government commissioner at the Court of First Instance in Port-au-Prince confirmed the resignation of Judge Etienne and specified that in order to properly investigate the case, it is necessary to demand the extradition to Haiti of all suspects imprisoned abroad, particularly in the United States. Etienne withdrew from the case, arguing personal reasons, less than a week after his appointment, after succeeding Judge Guerrier Aurelien last week when he later was denied the extension requested to extend the time of investigation. Violence against press workers in Mexico continues. This Friday, family and friends of Eber Lopez, journalist and director of the portal Noticias Web, mourned his death after he was shot in the Mexican state of Oaxaca. According to prosecutors, Lopez was shot dead by 2 men who waited for him outside his office last Thursday. The 2 suspects were later detained by officials who also recovered a weapon from them, although there is still no information on the motive for the killing. The Mexican state has expressed its concerns over attacks on media workers, which, according to the Attorney General's office, have claimed the lives of 5 journalists so far this year alone.
We demand justice to the federal and state agencies because we, the journalists, need to have the guarantees in order to work. What happened to Heber? What did they do to him in front of his family is very complicated because he didn't deserve this, and neither do we. We're not accusing anyone, we're just asking the prosecutor to identify those who participated in this crime with all of the consequences.
In Venezuela, people held a march to commemorate the 208th anniversary of the Day of the Youth to honor the sacrifice of young people who brought about the victory of independence forces under the commander of José Felix Rivas on 12 February 1814. The first vice president of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, Diosdado Cabello, invited young people to take part in the march to commemorate the anniversary of the Battle of La Victoria. According to the political leader, the march began from the wall of Petare and reached the center of the city of Caracas, the capital of the country. In this way, the president of the Bolivarian nation, Nicolas Maduro, participated in the event. In Uruguay, the opening parade of the calls took place again.
The magic of the drums once again took to the streets of Montevideo. After 2 years of absence, the opening parade of the calls could run normally. From the early morning, the Uruguayans went to Isla de Flores Street to enjoy a night full of drums.
We have the Great Candombe Festival. They are the calls, the official calls parade where we perform the Afro-Uruguayan culture that represents us in the world. We come from 2 years of pandemic, stationary, unable to carry out our activity. Last year, we could not have the parade, the event, and luckily we come back to the Island of Flowers. The weather was good, and today the party begins for us.
The parade of comparsas, the Candombe, takes place in the first days of February and attracts thousands of people all over the country. This year, Due to the health situation, it had a limited capacity, but the rhythms was contagious from the beginning. This is the party that all Uruguayans have, the carnival, the candombe. When we go out with the old mama, the gramillero, the drums, and we really enjoy it of what is typical, rooted like in other countries. This is our thing, to live it, to enjoy it, to dance it, to enjoy it and to have fun with the most beautiful thing there is in the people. The beating of the drums, the dances and the color were applauded by a crowd that overflowed with joy and came from all the neighborhoods of Montevideo to join the party. Look, I am from El Cerro and I go out in the Templando from Puerto Rico. Tomorrow I come to cheer the comparsa del Cerro because I saw the people up with the people always there supporting the neighborhood, supporting the culture that is the greatest thing we have. The opening parade of a call is an official contest where the best candombe group is awarded by the evaluation of 3 categories: drumming, dance and movement, and aesthetic design and execution. The winners will be announced in a few hours. More than 50 comparsas will parade between today and tomorrow along this street, Isla de Flores, which runs through the southern and Palermo neighborhoods in Montevideo. The candombe party is back on the streets of Uruguay.
Mateo Grille, TeleSUR, Montevideo, Uruguay.
We're going to take a short break now. Please join us again after this.
It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. In Bolivia, the announcement that Brazilian government granted temporary asylum to main defendant in the corruption scandal known as items or ghost government positions caused discomfort to the national government. Our correspondent Freddy Morales tells us the details.
Sectors of the legislative right wing consider that the political asylum that favors the main accused in the corruption scandal in the Santa Cruz mayor's office is a punishment because the government does not submit to U.S. pressures in extradition matters. We submit to these kind of actions because people, countries and organizations believe that we are not cooperated at international level. So this type of reactions and responses are surely and supposedly due to the lack of cooperation that we are showing. Although other political sectors consider that it is an issue that can be judicially redirected, I'm convinced that they are going to accept the extradition, but it is an inquiry that has to be made because apparently an administrative entity gave him the status of refugee. This has to be known by the justice system, and eventually the corresponding appeals will be filed. The controversy is about the Bolivian Antonio Parada, who fled to Brazil and was granted temporary asylum despite the fact that an extradition petition is underway. He is the main defendant in the corruption scandal known as ghost government positions or items. The Brazilian government consider it a political matter because this gentleman is being sought for common crimes, for having stolen money from Cruceños and Bolivians. Therefore, it has nothing to do with a political case. Now they are considering that he will be a political refugee. The Bolivian government did not hide its discontent with the Brazilian protection provided to a person accused of common crimes in his country of origin. Any measure that is attempted to be taken in other countries is null and void, and the Bolivian justice system will have to take the corresponding actions to achieve the repatriation of this subject, and that he can render a report to all the Bolivian people on where the resources that were stolen are. Antonio Parada is accused of setting up a system of corruption in the Santa Cruz mayor's office based on creating more than 800 positions in the last 7 years with the identity cards of people who were given $50 one time, the rest of the salary between $900 and more than $1,000 a month, including Christmas bonuses, was collected by him with a debit card.
Freddy Morales, TeleSUR, Bolivia.
Protesters marched across the United Kingdom against the country's rising cost of living and the government's announcement of increased energy bills. The protests came as United Kingdom's inflation jumped to 5.4% in December, the highest rate in almost 30 years. The Bank of England warned CPI will hit 6% by April, with Governor Andrew Bailey coming under fire for suggesting workers should not ask for big pay rises to control it. Demonstrators marched in London, Manchester, and Edinburgh, amongst other cities, holding placards against rising fuel costs. Protests held on Saturday were organized and coordinated by the People's Assembly, a political pressure group against austerity and supported by various trade unions.
What we're really seeing now is kind of unprecedented in terms of a perfect storm of effects on working people, massive inflation, getting told that our energy bills are going up by another 50%. They've already gone up last year. Wages have fallen in real terms for over a decade now since the Tories got into power. And we just want to be the start of a movement against all this to say enough is enough.
The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that a United States Navy Virginia-type submarine was detected on Saturday in Russian territorial waters. Moscow warned that a U.S. nuclear submarine was spotted near the Kuril Islands, where it was intersected by the Russian Pacific Fleet frigate Marshal Shaposhnikov, which used a appropriate means against a submersible. The Russian vessel warned the U.S. submarine in both Russian and English that it had penetrated Russian territorial waters, but its warning was ignored. Following this, the submarine used a self-propelled simulator to duplicate its signal on radar and acoustic controls and left Russian territorial waters at maximum speed. After the incident, the U.S. military attaché in Moscow was summoned before the authorities. It is believed that the submarine was intended to spy on naval maneuvers. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke by telephone on Saturday with his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden on Saturday amid escalating tensions over Ukraine. Both heads of state spoke for 1 hour in a bid to defuse the crisis over Ukraine, while the U.S. State Department ordered all but a core team of its diplomats and employees to leave the American embassy in Kiev over fears that Moscow allegedly would soon mount a major assault. Even after the calls between the top U.S. and Russian diplomats and between the country's defense secretaries, a path to a diplomatic resolution to the standoff appeared to be narrowing. Turkmenistan will hold early presidential elections on March 12th after the country's president called for a generational change. According to the Interfax agency, President Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, in power since 2006, ordered the Central Election Commission to start preparing for the elections. The next regular elections were to be held in 2024, but on Friday the head of state announced at a meeting of the People's Council, the upper house of parliament, his intention to transfer his post to a young leader. The president of Turkmenistan is elected directly by the Turkmen people and holds office for a 7-year term. On the 75th anniversary of Union Day in Myanmar, its military junta announced that it would release over 800 prisoners from its jails on Saturday. According to the United Nations Human Rights Office, the country has been in turmoil since last year's coup, with mass protests and a subsequent military crackdown that has killed more than 1,000 civilians. In a customary gesture for national holidays, the head of the military council that seized power last year announced an amnesty for the prisoners, but it was unclear how many political detainees were among those freed. Those given amnesty will be mostly from prisons in Yangon. As of Friday, the government was keeping around 9,000 people under detention, according to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners.
My son was arrested on September 14, 2021, and he arrived in prison around the end of October. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for incitement against the military. I don't know if he will be released today or not, but I just came here and I'm waiting outside.
Experts assure that Portugal is experiencing one of its worst droughts in the last 20 years. According to experts heard at the last meeting of the Permanent Commission for the Prevention, Surveillance and Monitoring of the Effects of the Drought, the year 2022 is on track to be another dry year with an 80% probability. The situation has generated that water reservoirs in the center of the country are dying up in plain sight, which worries farmers and local residents. In this context, the governments of Spain and Portugal have analyzed the current scenario of water scarcity and have agreed to strengthen their cooperation for the management of hydrographic basins.
The water reserves have decreased by 20% in the last 20 years. So every time we have a drought, depending on its intensity and duration, the situation only gets worse. At the level of the Iberian Peninsula, it is very important that both Portugal and Spain are fully aware of the impact of these climatic changes, and especially regarding the problem of water management. Several studies indicate that water management will be the next problem facing mankind.
We're going to take a final short break now. Please join us again after this. Hi, welcome back to From the South. Canadian police were present on Saturday where protesters are gathered at a border crossing between Canada and the United States. The tense standoff at the border crossing, crucial to both countries' economies, appeared to be dissolving peacefully as Canadian police moved in to disperse a nearly week-long blockade and demonstrators began leaving without resistance. Many demonstrators drove away from the Ambassador Bridge spanning the river between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, as scores of police approached shortly after dawn. They had spent the night there in defiance of new warnings to end the blockade, which disrupted the flow of traffic and goods and forced the auto industry on both sides to roll back production. The six-day demonstration aimed at protesting against Canada's COVID-19 mandates and restrictions. Hundreds of people and dozens of trucks remained dug in Saturday along Wellington Street in front of Parliament Hill and around downtown Ottawa, where many have been parked since the end of January. Trucks began honking their horns continuously in the area as police officers sat parked in nearby vehicles. While the protesters were decrying vaccine mandates for truckers and other COVID-19 restrictions, many of Canada's infection measures, such as mask rules and vaccine passports for getting into restaurants and theaters, are already falling away as the Omicron surge levels get off. Paris police intercepted at least 500 vehicles attempting to enter the French capital Saturday in defiance of a police order to take part in protests against virus restrictions inspired by Canada's horn-honking Freedom Convoy. The police said on Twitter that several convoys were stopped from entering at key city arteries and over 200 motorists were handed tickets. Around 7,000 officers have been mobilized for the weekend protests. So far, the police blockade action has seemed effective. Waving French flags and shouting freedom, the protesters organized online, inspired in part by truckers who have blockaded Canada's capital and blocked border crossings. The French action has no single leader or goal and comes as months of protests against French government vaccination rules have been waning. A convoy of vehicles from across the Netherlands brought the Hague city center to a brief standstill on Saturday, protesting coronavirus restrictions inspired by Canadian truckers who congested the capital, Ottawa. Several hundred vehicles during the day blocked access to the Binnenhof seat of the Dutch government, according to a report by public television. After police warned protesters in The Hague they would be fined and arrested if they did not leave by mid-afternoon, drivers withdrew. Protesters had started to arrive in the early morning in trucks, cars, tractors, and even caravans. At first, they refused to leave until fundamental and long-lasting change was enacted and all COVID restrictions were lifted nationwide. Police dispersed a group of people and dealt blows. At least 2 people were arrested. Anger spilled over into violence in January last year and again in November when riots erupted in cities including The Hague and Rotterdam. Hundreds of Cypriots from different towns gathered in the capital Nicosia to demonstrate against COVID measures and vaccines enforced by the government. The Cyprus Freedom Convoy, inspired by self-styled convoys against COVID rules that started in Canada and spread elsewhere, was held to send a message to the government asking to end all mandates and COVID-related restrictions. Riot police were protecting the areas as demonstrators increased in numbers. Venezuela received a donation of 17 tons of medical supplies from Belarus. The shipment arrived after the Eastern European Nations Council of Ministers instructed its Ministry of Health to ensure the delivery of medicines to the South American nation to support the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The donation included face masks, surgical overalls, special footwear, and disposable protective gear. The ambassador of Belarus in Venezuela, Andriy Molchan, emphasized that both countries maintain good bilateral relations of mutual benefit. In the meantime, the Vice President of the Council of Ministers of Planning for the Venezuelan government, Ricardo Menendez, pointed out the contribution in kind constituted a sign of solidarity and cooperation between the two countries in times of the pandemic. Gaza opened its largest field hospital for COVID patients with support from the United Arab Emirates in the Strip. Youssef Abu al-Rish, Undersecretary of the Ministry of Health in Gaza, announced that the field hospital has 218 beds. 56 of them have been allocated to deal with critical and serious cases, and the rest of the beds will be for less severe cases, in addition to 2 beds for patients with kidney failure. It took 4 months to build the hospital, and they brought in all the equipment through trucks that came from the Jordanian side, then through the Sinai, and then the Rafah crossing until it reached the Strip of Gaza. Health authorities in Palestine have registered so far over 550,000 people with COVID-19 and almost 5,000 people dead. We've come to the end of this news brief, but remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at TeleSUR English. You can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Dio Martin. Thanks for watching.